We continue to monitor the student protests at the University of Cape Town. This follows protests over issues related to registration and access to accommodation. Student leaders at UCT want those with historical debt to be able to register and get accommodation to be made available to them, especially the ones who've been accepted. For more, let's speak to UCT spokesperson Elijah Moholola on Zoom. A very good morning to you, Elijah. With the student protests happening in the last few days, can you give us an update on what the situation is like today?
Good morning, Desiree, and to the viewers. Since Tuesday, our classes have been moved online. We had hoped to move them back in person this morning, but after we had made the announcement that classes are going back in person, well, some of those which could possibly go back. After we made that announcement, we have had this morning a situation where students did embark on more protest action. Yesterday, for the large part of the day, we didn't have any protest. The executive engaged with the student leadership, and we reasonably believed that there was a way found around the differences, which is why we were supposed to go back. But as we speak, we do have some forms of protest action taking place on campus.
So just in terms of the students whose issues have not been resolved, what happens to them? Are they going to be left out?
Difficult one to answer, because the difficulty as we see it is we do not know who are those students. I'll tell you why. There is various means that the executive have put in place to try and address all cases of students with historic debt. There's very many categories. I'll outline just three. The first is that council approved that with effect from this year, if your debt is less than 10,000, you are going to be allowed to register. Previously, you needed to have a debt of less than 1,000. Now that threshold has been increased considerably to say anyone owing out less than 10,000 can still register. As a result of that decision, we have about 3,400 students who were able to register despite owing the university. That is the one set of measure. Then the next set of measure is what we call grace period. Grace period says if a student can come to the university, apply and show that within a reasonable space of time, they will deal with the debt. It might not be less than 10,000 at the moment, but within the next 3 months, 6 months, or however long, they show that they'll be able to deal with it. The university allows such a student to continue with the academic program. And out of that program, we have actually had 337 students who have been allowed to register. And then the final measure was through our financial aid appeals, where students who fall within various categories of financial aid at the beginning of the year can apply to UCT for financial assistance. And out of that process, we have had about 250, 260 successful applications. So those are the range of measures that have been put in place that we believe have actually gone a long way towards ensuring that all students who are eligible can get this financial assistance.
Let's talk a bit more about that financial assistance. You spoke about it in your statement, saying UCT management is committed to making 5 million rand available to assist students with fee blocks on condition that through fundraising initiatives, the SRC matches this amount. How is the SRC going to be able to match this amount? And aren't you worried that you're going to leave out brilliant students who might contribute to this, bring about solutions for the challenges that the country is going through at the moment?
So the first thing to mention is that that is just an additional measure. So all other students would have been covered through the measures that I've outlined, including the three: the grace period, the financial aid appeals, as well as this program of, the council policy of lifting the fee block threshold. And then additionally, there's several others. We've got, for instance, just this year, we've got 2 additional funders, external funders who've come on board, made money available. Additionally, we've got more financial institutions, at least 2, that have come on board and entered into favorable arrangements with the UCT leadership. So those are additional measures. The 5 million is a way of the executive saying to the SRC, the fee issue requires collaborative action from various stakeholders, the SRC, the Department of Higher Education, NSFAS, and everyone else. So we are signaling to the SRC to say, let us work together. Instead of saying we are confronted with the problem and taking each other on, Let us focus on solutions. And the one additional layer of solution that we are bringing to the table is this 5 million that then encourages the SRC to raise equivalent amount, of which they are not going to do it on their own. The executive will work with them. And we have, of course, in the past years, almost every year, there are fundraising initiatives by the executive, by the SRC, supported by the executive. So even in this case, they are going to be supported. At the end of the day, the end results means you are taking the 5 million and multiplying it by 2 or even more if the SRC can manage to raise even more.
Elijah, is the institution concerned about reports that students who have been blocked out, don't have access to accommodation, are sleeping in undesirable areas and conditions just as they await the institution, a response, some sort of positive response from the institution?
Again, those are the students that, Desiree, we are not really aware of. I'll tell you why. Again, we have done at least 3 things differently this year in terms of accommodation. The one is that as a standard measure, if you arrive at UCT without accommodation at the beginning of the year, we put you into what we call transit accommodation. So you stay in there until you are sorted. But additionally, the students would have been in what we call VAC accommodation, vacation accommodation, who had to vacate by a specific date. But this year, those students, even those who were owing and were in vacation accommodation, were allowed to stay on longer. And then another thing that we've done is that we have spoken actually or secured accommodation off campus for students who stayed there in what we called, introduced this year, we called emergency accommodation for those students whose circumstances were still not permissible for them to register. They were secured accommodation by the university off campus. And then just recently this week, what we did is that, recognizing that accommodation is expensive, private accommodation in the southern suburbs in Cape Town is expensive, we've negotiated successfully with an external service provider to say students from UCT will come to your accommodation but not be required to pay the 3 months upfront deposit. Now that service provider has agreed, and they are now, as we speak, accommodating UCT students. Anyone who may claim to be homeless or without accommodation as a UCT student would certainly be somebody whose circumstances are not known to UCT, who has not approached the university to say, this is my specific case. And if they fell in any of those categories, they would have been accommodated.
Do you think you're doing enough? Waking up this morning to news that the Saul Plaatje University in the Northern Cape has had some sort of agreement with protesting students, and students can now start with their formal studies. Do you think the UCT is doing enough?
We are doing everything possible to make sure that we resolve this. I'll give you an example as well again. 2 weeks ago, the same issues of free blocks, the same issue of student accommodation came up. The management met with the SRC. And then after those engagements and discussions, measures were put in place, agreements were reached. Now that is 2 weeks ago. This latest round of action unfortunately came only on a Monday, and we picked up only on Sunday, on the eve of the start of the academic year, that the SRC has some level of dissatisfaction. So what that did, it put the management on the back foot insofar as having sufficient time to engage with whatever demands they might have been. But what is then interesting is that these demands are a repeat of what was tabled 2 weeks ago, of what was handled 2 weeks ago. Yet, yes, we admit that they at least helped us to think of more measures that have since come to the fore, but one would have expected that in that last round of engagements, issues should have been put in the table, and then when there is agreement, we then focus on the academic year. And one would question why then on the eve of the start of the academic year, these issues cropped up again, and it's exactly the same issues.
What plans have you got in place for students who will miss out on the initial parts of the start of the academic year?
Most students would be covered, and we know that this is not an ideal mode, but most students would be covered via online learning. That is in cases where classes are not ongoing because of what is happening on campus. But as well, there's going to be discussions within our teaching and learning portfolio. There's going to be discussions that looks at what other additional measures can be put in place, even recognizing that students who are studying online this week. We're not studying under the most ideal circumstances that might affect their performances, that might have accepted their interaction with the courses. So there's going to be discussions, and then we are going to announce as soon as next week. We are going to communicate to the students what measures are going to be taken or put into place just to ensure that we recognize the impact that this week has had on them and on their learning.
Elijah, thank you so much for talking to us. I have a sense that I mangled your surname at the beginning. Is it Moholola?
Yes, it's Moholola.
Elijah Moholola is with the University of Cape Town there, giving us an update on student protests.